The tragedy of the commons is a conceptual foundation of many disciplines, including economics, government, and park management. In the recreation and parks field, it forms the conceptual justification for managing the resource in park management and carrying capacity. The story of Bessy the cow is used to demonstrate the tragedy of the commons. The location is the typical commons or park found in New England towns. This is Bessy's story. Garrett Hardin's 1968 article is considered the classic reference on the tragedy of the commons. It is used as a foundation or starting point for this video. However, there are a couple things that he did not consider that are included here. The tragedy of the commons can be broken down into several components. First, there is a commons. It is a finite resource. The New England town commons is used as an example. The use of the commons is free or perceived to be free by the users. Bessy looks covetously at the commons with its lush grass, and being free to use, Farmer John calculates that he can lower the cost of milk production. Third, since the resource is free or perceived to be free, it is to everyone's advantage to use it. Farmers Mark and John choose to graze their cows in the commons. In the park management field, this is referred to as the limits of acceptable change, since the grass will rejuvenate itself over time. However, the other farmers want to graze their cows in the commons also. Since it is free and public, it is to their benefit to use the commons too. Also, it lowers their cost of producing milk and saves them money. Herein lies the tragedy. The tragedy is that it is to everyone's advantage to use the commons. Collectively, it results in harm to all. Overgrazing and lower milk production are the collective harm. Garrett Hardin noted that individual moral restraint doesn't work. Farmer John recognizes the problem and decides to do the right thing. He removes Bessy from the commons. Not only does it raise the cost of his milk production, but it doesn't solve the tragedy either. The incentive for others to use the commons remains. The other farmers simply fill the commons with more cows, and the collective harm continues. Rationing is the arbitrary allocation of the resource to users. Traditionally, the government has been the determiner of the allocation. Rationing can occur by giving everyone equal but lesser amounts of the resource, by chance, or by some other mechanism. Rationing can focus on when the user uses the resource. In Bessy's story, it is Monday is for Farmer Al and Tuesday is for Farmer John. Rationing can focus on who uses the resource. All the farmers could place their names in a hat. The winner would be permitted to graze his cows in the commons. Or rationing can focus on how the resource is to be used. The town council may decide to use the commons as a park and not for grazing cows. The foundation of park management can easily be seen from these examples. In addition, more than one method may be used at any one time. Although individual moral restraint doesn't work, collective moral restraint can work. Change the norm, change the behavior. Garrett Hardin addressed individual moral restraint, but he didn't really address collective moral restraint. Recognizing the problem, the farmers could get together and collectively decide to limit the use of the commons. The strength of collective moral restraint is predicated on the strength of the norm. The weaker the norm, and the more the cheating is encouraged. Norms can be strengthened with the passage of laws. Traditionally, discussions of the tragedy of the commons juxtapose the role of government versus private ownership as competing solutions. Private ownership is a potential solution to preventing the collective harm. Ownership of the resource enables Farmer John to focus the factors of production on producing milk and not on other things. Conversely, ownership permits Farmer John to limit other uses and other users, which helps protect the integrity of the resource. Those favoring privatization argue that Farmer John would seek to optimize milk production. Normally, Farmer John wants to maximize his profits, but he also wants to limit the size of the herd so that the grass will regenerate itself naturally. Regardless, there is always the temptation to add one more cow to the herd. Privatization is a solution to the tragedy of the commons, but it is not infallible. A solution overlooked by Hardin was to enlarge the commons. Where government is traditionally viewed as a solution to the tragedy of the commons, government can purposely create a commons to justify expanding its programs. Although farmers Joe and Dan have graciously sacrificed their homes for the greater good, it is an example of reallocating resources away from these farmers to the other farmers. However, it is usually only a temporary solution, since the incentive to use the commons are still there. Bessy's commentary notes this with, until they fill the commons up with cows again. For most people, the urban beltway epitomizes the process of enlarging the commons. The beltway starts as a 4-lane highway. Gridlock results. It is expanded to 6 or even 8 lanes. Again, gridlock results. Finally, the beltway is expanded to 10 or even 12 lanes. Gridlock remains. By redistributing tax dollars, the government programs are viewed as being essentially free, and users are incentivized to use them. Increased demand stresses the program and justifies expanding it. In turn, this takes resources away from other programs, or metaphorically, 2 more houses are bulldozed to enlarge the government program. The tragedy of the commons is the conceptual foundation for many disciplines, including economics, government, and park management. In the recreation and parks field, it forms the conceptual justification for managing the resource, and it is the underlying foundation for carrying capacity. Traditionally, the tragedy of the commons was used to justify government involvement through regulation and management to counter the collective harm of individuals acting in their self-interest. In this situation, government can be the solution. However, government can purposely create the commons to justify expanding its programs. Free programs create overuse or the collective harm. The stress on the program justifies enlarging the government program. Both the program and bureaucracy expand. The tragedy of the government-created commons is often overlooked in the literature. This brings to an end Bessy's story about the tragedy of the commons.